Hey everybody, this is Andrew from Game Changers, and I just wanted to share with you a new way that I came up with of searching Podio that's way more efficient if you're interested in searching by multiple parameters, and also if you have situations where you need to search a large amount of Podio data, and using GlobiFlow alone can take an excessive amount of time. A good example of this is some work that I did where a client had asked for a table of data in a PDF, and I had to search, an enormous amount of data, like 30,000 records, in order to get the ones that I needed. And I could only search by one variable, and then I had to for each out all the ones that I didn't need, and then from there I for each record into a table row, as is the normal practice if you want to build a manual table. And it was taking a long time. So in some cases, the report would take, the PDF would take over 10 minutes to run, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, a very long time. And it's difficult for the client to, run a report and wait, 15 minutes when really they want to be able to run it and get it, more or less instantly. So I've been playing around with the SQL connection between GlobiFlow and MySQL. You can have a SQL table where anytime an item is created in Podio, or whenever an item is updated in Podio, it pushes those to SQL instantaneously. And the great thing about this connection is that it doesn't cost you any additional actions. It's just something that's built into GlobiFlow. You can use it whenever you want. And then you can also sync back from SQL to Podio, but it runs every hour. But I'm only focusing on the one way right now. It's basically dumping all of the data that you have in a Podio app into a SQL table, and once you do this, here's an example of what this looks like in GlobiFlow. So you go to GlobiFlow, you would start out by inputting your server information, port, your username and password, what database, and then once you do so, you get the choice of tables that you want to use. I've eliminated my password for security reasons, obviously, so we don't see everything that you would see here, but as long as you fill in all of these details, you will see a drop-down list of tables that you can select from, and then you've got your mapping here. So you can map whatever Podio field you want to a column in your SQL table. Now, just to pause here to talk about a couple of things that are necessary for this to happen. One is Podio, GlobiFlow needs to store the item ID, and also they store a hash in order to make sure that each record in the SQL table is actually unique, and there won't be any collisions or any confusion when you bring the data back. What you would do in your SQL table, so this is my SQL table structure. I have a big init 20 field, unsigned, and then I've got a hash, which is a varchar 32. So these are the two fields that you absolutely need to have in your table in order to take advantage of this GlobiFlow functionality. And then I have, as you can see, four other columns for my corresponding four columns in my projects app. This is my test projects app. I've just dumped a lot of dummy data in here. I've got three different categories to choose from. This is obviously for example purposes, but it could be much more complicated. A category field, and then a start date and an end date. And I'm storing those details here in their fields, and you can see this is all my data in my SQL table here. So the reason I'm telling you this is because when you finally get this all set up and you get your data in the SQL table, for those of you who do not have a lot of experience working with MySQL, it is fast. It is near instantaneous, and it has to be because it's a technology that almost every website in the world is built on, and you want to be able to get records from these tables via multiple criteria and have it load while the user's waiting and looking at the website to load. So it has to be fast, and it is lightning fast, way faster than searching Podio, especially when you're searching large amounts of data. So in order to solve my problem, I've dumped all of my project data here into my SQL table. And what I'm using is a brand new feature that's just been recently released using ProcFoo. And you can find it on your home screen by clicking code. These are custom code blocks that you can create in PHP. So what I've done is I've created some examples of things that you can do in order to get the data back into GlobiFlow and then do different things with it. Your options are basically infinite once you're holding a JSON object that indicates all of the items that you were searching for. And the great thing too about the GlobiFlow built-in functionality is the item ID is required. So you have the Podio item ID as one of your options. And then you can continue to use procfoo to say, get the raw item, get the fields of an item, do anything you want to that Podio item because you're holding the item ID. So what I'm going to show you are some examples of some code blocks that I've created in procfoo using PHP that queries a SQL table inside a database and returns the results in a JSON object. And I'm going to show you examples of me getting everything in the table as one big object, converting everything in the object to a table to an HTML table that you can just pop right into a PDF already done up, which is the main reason I started out doing this. And then a couple of examples where you send a JSON array of search parameters using GlobiFlow to this script. It captures them, does the search for you, the query, and then returns the results. And it always comes back in a JSON object, except for this example here. So let's start off by talking about just getting everything, okay? So I've removed my password. I'm going to pause the video and put my passwords back, and I'll demonstrate on the GlobiFlow side how this all works, but for security reasons, I've removed them for now. So I have a function here, basically just to open a database connection. So you would put all the same details in here that you put into GlobiFlow to make it work in the first place. And then this is my query. So I'm asking for a number of columns from a table in this database. In this case, it's called projects test, okay? I know some of this might be confusing for those of you who don't have any coding experience, but I have recently just sort of taught myself a lot using w3schools.com, reading through the PHP tutorial, and then there's a SQL tutorial as well. A lot of good information in there, and I'll put some code examples up in the blog post as well so that you can copy and paste. So we're doing a SQL query, and then inside this query, we are creating an array, or rather pushing miniature arrays, like subarrays, into a master array for each row of the table. So I've created a blank array so that I can reference it, and then I'm using array push, which is great here because this is something that's not necessarily available as a function in GlobiFlow, but it is here, and a lot more functions available to you inside these procfoo code blocks. So I'm pushing into my blank array one array per row. And we see it contains the Podio item ID, the project name. These are all my columns, column 2, column 3, column 4. And I am just making sure that the dates come back to GlobiFlow in the same format that Podio likes them, so that I don't have to do too much work there. Otherwise, it'll just return a blank array. So you'll get nothing back, and then if you in GlobiFlow for each a blank array, nothing will happen. So, and then we close the connection and then return, and this is how these code blocks work. You use the return function like you would for a regular function, or return keyword like you would for the regular function, to push whatever value you're calling back to wherever you're calling it from, in this case, GlobiFlow. So this is example number 1, getting everything and creating an array, in a JSON array that I can then decode on the GlobiFlow side and then do whatever I want to them. Here's an example of me doing the same thing, same kind of query, only I'm building a very simple table. No style, just table, table head. These are my headers. So I'm creating the variable. And this is, it looks different, but it's exactly what you would also do if you were doing it in GlobiFlow. Create your table header and your start to it. And then for each row, you would create an HTML row, reference the same table, concatenate everything together, and then at the end, close your table, return the table. So this all happens much faster than GlobiFlow can do for me. And then I can have the complete HTML table that I can pop into a PDF, and I'll show you just how fast it is. I'm only searching 120 records, but honestly, this is something that's going to speed it up regardless of how you use it. You'll get to your results much faster using this method. And then I've got 2 examples of code blocks where, actually start with this one, code blocks where I'm using the pf payload, _payload. This is the payload that you send to the code block using your remote post in GlobiFlow. So you can send whatever you want, text, I'm using JSON just because it makes sense to me. I'm just going to create a JSON array of search parameters, one parameter, multiple parameters, and then decode each parameter so that I can use it later on in the script. So this is almost exactly the same as JSON projects, get all projects, except I've got this right here. So this is the second part of the SQL query. I'm getting all the columns from that table where category equals the category that I'm asking for. And then it will only return those items. And finally, using the between keyword in SQL to provide a start date and an end date, ask for items between those two dates, return them as an array as well. So you can see there's a lot of these that are very similar to each other, just tiny little differences to show you what the possibilities are. So these are my 4 code blocks that I've written that I'm going to use to query my database for information in different formats. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put my passwords back into all my code blocks. So now everything's functional there. And I'm going to show you how I call each of these functions in GlobyFlow and how it comes back. So this is the first example. I'm just going to get the entire object and then I'm going to decode it so you can show you what it looks like. So here's my function. I'm not using a payload. It's optional parameter. Just the function itself, and then I'm going to decode the entire object that comes back so you can see. And you'll see just how much faster it is. So bang, now we're holding the results of our search. This is 120 items. Obviously, you would see just the same kind of speed if you were searching an app of 30,000 items. And you can get the entire object and then start to work with it. So that's just the example of me getting the entire contents of the app. Here's an example where I'm decoding down to the Podio item ID. So from here, I can do the same thing, only now I'm using JSON decode and I'm using the ID. So I can do a number of things. I can get the raw Podio item using the ID. Or anything else that I need to do to the Podio item ID, update the fields of it with information that came from the table. Basically, the sky's the limit, whatever you need to do. So it's exactly the same as the first example, only I'm showing you how you can decode down to a specific variable and for each using, and this is also a brand new function in GlobyFlow, not that old, being able to for each of the sub pieces of a JSON array just by using it like you normally would. So those examples are basically the same, a little bit different. Here is the table. So again, no need for a payload. I'm just getting every object in the database, using the code block to turn it into a table, and then returning the table as a completed HTML object that I can just throw right into the PDF without any further action. So if I preview this PDF, you can see just how much faster it is to produce. This has 120 lines, which would take GlobyFlow a lot longer than what it just did in order to produce using the old method. So here you can get all of the objects out of the table and then create the table from them at once and just return the table. And as you can see, it pops up much faster. So that's second scenario. Now let's talk about searching. Let's say you want to search the table for information. Here's the first example. Actually, go to this one. This is the first example. So what I said before was I'm creating a JSON array of parameters. This one only has one parameter, but now I'm using the payload in the procfoo code script. And this is what comes back as the variable pf_payload. So you can do whatever you want to that. Give it text, give it whatever. I just find this method to be much clearer. So, whether it's one parameter or multiple parameters, you can then decode down to the parameters at the other side. And it makes it much more readable and easy to understand what you're doing. So here's the same thing as before. I'm only getting projects that have a category A as their option. And if we simulate variables here, we'll see in our object, you can see everything is only category A, of which there are 30 or 40, 40 of them. So at this point, I could be making additional calls for each one of these using the Podio item ID, doing different things to them, and going through them that way. And then my final example is using the between keyword in my SQL query, where I'm sending 2 objects. So now I'm using the code block, I'm separating it out into 2 parameters and saying between one and the other. So this would be show me all projects in the first quarter, between January 1st and the end of March. Exactly the same thing, my new function between dates. So now if I simulate variables here, we can see, okay, 321, 321. These are all of the objects that only have dates between January 1st and March 31st. So using this new function, these code blocks to do your own SQL queries, shows you how you can get to your Podio data much faster, especially when you have to search against multiple parameters. And then once you're holding the object that's your complete data, you can use the new Globiflow for each to break it up and do different things, or maybe you just want to store the whole object, whatever you want to do. Using these new code blocks, it makes it so much faster, so much easier. Thank you for watching this video. I'll have this up on the blog post, and I'll put as many code examples to go along with it so that you can copy and paste as well. Happy hacking!